may be seated this morning. We're going to be in Exodus chapter 16. Exodus chapter 16 here. And I'm actually going to jump in pretty quickly there, so make your way over pretty fast. Because we got a long section of scripture here, so we're going to go through quickly this morning. But then I also have something fun to show you in just a couple minutes. And I want to leave time for that as well here. And so we're going to be in Exodus 16, starting in verse 1. Exodus 16, verse 1. They set out from Elim, and all the congregation of the people of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai on the 15th day of the second month after they had departed from the land of Egypt. So it says now that they left Elim. If you were here last week, then you might remember that, I'll move this over here so people can see. But if you remember from last week from Elim, that they got to an area of 12 springs where there was enough water for every single person. There was also, there was palm trees, there was shade. There was a place of intense comfort, like they had probably never experienced before in their life, that they had comfort. But that wasn't the promised land, that God still had something better for us. And so just in the same way, you might be in a situation that's a place of comfort in your life, but that's not saying that that's necessarily the place that God has for you, and he might call you farther away. And so he came out and he said, we have to leave Elim and go to the place of the wilderness of Sin. Which, if that was me, I'd be like, no, thank you, I'm good. Like, right? And so, number one, that sin, notice it has a capital S, which would mean that it's a proper noun. And so this was not actually just talking about sin the way that we normally think of sin, which is doing bad things, but rather this was actually the place. It was called Sin. That was the actual name of it, and it was probably that way just because it eventually becomes Sinai, and they were in the Sinai Peninsula there as well. But it is kind of ironic, and it is fitting, actually, that it is also called the wilderness of sin. Now, whenever I think of the wilderness of sin, I'm thinking of like sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right? I'm thinking of Las Vegas. I'm thinking of like, choose your best sin. Like you want to do murder, great. Like whatever you want to do, that's fine here. This is obviously some big stuff. But what we're going to find out here is in this wilderness of sin, it is as well also going to be a sinful place for them. But the way that they're going to sin is not the way that we would normally think of it, but the way that they sin is actually going to be a lack of contentment. And we say, well, that's not big. Like, it should be called the wilderness of minor sins, the wilderness of look the other way, the wilderness of like everybody does it. Like, that's what we should actually call that. But no, because in fact, whenever we struggle with contentment, whenever we struggle with we don't have what we want, we don't have what we feel like God should have provided us with, whenever we say that, that will ultimately lead to greater sins. See, if you're not content with the wife that you have, eventually you're going to commit adultery, right? Because you haven't been content with what God has given you. If you aren't content with the money that God has given you through the job, eventually you're going to start doing cheating on your taxes. You're going to do fraud. You're going to do all sorts of things whenever. And so it always starts out really with a lack of contentment. And whenever we aren't content with what God has for it, it leads to greater sin. And that's what's happening here. And so it says on the 15th day of the second month, so they have been actually traveling for 1 month time is all they've been. And they've only messed up 42 times. So that's about par for the course here. But in verse 2, it says the whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And let me remind you, when it says the whole congregation, that's about 3 million people. And you thought you had it bad with your two bratty little kids that were grumbling at you, right? Try 3 million of them. I'm sorry, your kids are angels. But try 3 million of them that are grumbling and complaining against you now. It would not be a fun situation to be Moses and Aaron, right? Because in verse 3 it says, and the people of Israel said to them, would that we have died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt. I'm just imagining a whiny little child saying this actually, but Mom, I'm starving, right? And when we sat by the meat pots and the bread to the full. Now, number one, I have no idea what meat pots is, but that sounds delicious and I want some, right? And bread to the full? Yes, please. For you have brought us out into the wilderness to kill the whole assembly with hunger. So now put yourself in their shoes. They have been brought out of slavery after 400 years in slavery. They see mighty, mighty plagues that kill all the Egyptians, but save them. And then they walk through the Red Sea, and then the Egyptian army gets killed right behind them. And then they finally get out. They almost die from lack of thirst last week, but God provided that for them and saved them again. But then now they're like, but you brought us all this way to kill us now. It's like, really? God could have been much more efficient. He could have been like, hey guys, just wait in the Red Sea a couple minutes. I'll be right back. Like there's ways that he could have killed them if he wanted to kill them. But yet in this moment now, after just 1 month of traveling, they have been convinced on more than one occasion that God had brought them out just to kill them. And we say, well, why? Like, what would cause him to do that? It doesn't make any sense here. But yet they are looking around and they are seeing that they don't have what they thought they should have. And it's interesting because they start saying, if you would have left us in Egypt, we had enough meat pots, and that sounds delicious. Like I said, I want some. But we had enough meats. We had enough bread. We had all the things that we'd ever want. We were living so nice. But don't forget, back in Egypt, they were slaves. That's not actually a good thing here. And so the very first point in your bulletin is this, is that complaining means you don't remember the past as well as you thought. We're going to have two ideas here. We're going to look at what it means to have a complaining heart, and then also what it means to have a heart of content. And so whenever it talks about complaining, it's first you have to realize you don't remember the past as well as you thought it was. Now, I don't know what age specifically this happens because it's probably different for every single person. But I guarantee you at some point in your life, you're going to stop looking forward to the future and you're going to start looking past and think that was a better time. So for young people, I said maybe I'm still young, yay. For young people, we're always going to look forward into the future and say, well, in another 5 years, I'm going to have my spouse. In another 5 years, I'm going to have my dream job. In another 5 years, everything's going to work perfectly out here in the next 5 years. And we always look forward. Young people look forward into the future. But then for the older folks, you start at some point, it switches, and you say, well, things aren't getting any better. Like, I'm not feeling any better at this point. And so you start to look back, and you start to say, well, back then, everything was so good. Back then, before my kids were teenagers, when they were little kids, that was so nice. Whenever I was back in high school, have you ever talked to an old guy that's like, man, back in high school, I was racing cars and chasing girls, and it was awesome, and I want to go back to high school. It's like, no, you don't. Because every single high schooler in the history of high school, what's the one thing they want? To get out of high school, right? And now all of a sudden we look back and we say, oh, but that was the awesome time. No, there was times back then that were hard. There's times right now that's hard. But what that shows is that we just don't actually have a heart of contentment to where God has us right now. And they are there in the wilderness after being led out. They've only been out for 1 month, and yet they're now convinced that God is going to kill them, and they're now grumbling against Moses and Aaron. And so this last week, Devin and Joel, whom I love, had a lot of fun this week in my office trying to enact or trying to play out a little bit of what it might have looked like if Moses was in the year 2022. And what that complaining, Moses' attitude might have been here. And so I have a short few-minute long clip here that we want to go on before we go on with the rest of the sermon. Watch this and enjoy these guys.
Too funny. Yeah, so I guess I'm here to set straight, some of the record. There's been some complaining under my leadership, and I always remind everyone it's God's leadership. So if you complain, you're basically arguing with God, and not that I'm God for sure. But yeah, there's been a lot of complaints about that we're just out here in the wilderness to die, and I don't know what these guys want. The Lord has freed them from slavery, and we've been out into this wilderness, and He's taken care of us pretty good. But ultimately, they're just responding with grumbling. There's no Chick-fil-A's out in the wilderness. We just need a map to show them that. Oh, okay. Yeah. So last week, Steve, he gets up earlier than the rest of us. I get up really early, but Steve, he really does get up early. And he came out of his tent and he was going to latrine, to put it lightly. And he stepped in something, and I had to laugh because I didn't get a chance to tell everyone yet that was our breakfast. The Lord was feeding us from the ground. I know they're used to eating off the plates of the Egyptians or whatever they have, but out here in the wilderness, we have it frontier style, on the ground, sometimes covered in dirt, and that you got to eat a little dirt before you die. Well, yeah, I guess when you mention that, I have made some mistakes, and I'll admit it. It happens to the best of us, but that was not a very good day. Like I said, we'd been in the wilderness for a while, and I've been worn down from all those complaints that they had been lodging with me. I told Aaron to create a complaint box, but that wasn't going to be in for 3 weeks. Amazon had delays. So it's just a bad day for me, and I struck the rock more than I should have. I admit that. But the Lord provided, and He always will. I just got to learn a little more patience. You know who really needs patience, though? George. All he does is ask. And if he would just put a complaint in the box, I'd get to it in 5 to 7 days. Yeah, we put in a lot of work. You know, we were going to go with stone tablets, but, you know, the iPad was on sale, and it's a tablet, so that's what we try to use around here. It works out pretty good. Oh, hey, Aaron.
Hey, have you seen all my jewelry? Like, I can't find any of the gold or anything.
I don't know. Did you check your jewelry box?
In the wife's box.
That guy, he's always forgetting stuff, but it's all right. I just tell him what to say, and he says it. He's just literally, he reads anything from the teleprompter I put on it. Anything. He's a good kid, though. Yeah, so it's been a few years now. There's been a few mishaps along the way. Something's happened. Oh, gosh! Aaron, get my snake hook!
I can't find it! Not again, Moses!
Oh, look! Israel! It's the Great Stone River! Let me make sure it's safe. Mark! Yeah, I wish we were doing this on a Wednesday. I'd have my hair done a little bit better, you know. I think I could go see Debbie on Tuesdays. No, someone else will get that. Not worried about it. I'll take care of it. Send it to my voicemail. Aaron did that too. Sorry. This could be a good start to the morning. Yeah. Diane?
What?
Do you have any rubber bands? I would kind of groom my beard a little bit. Get a little airflow underneath this. You're filming this, aren't you?
Devin's been dressing that way all week now. It's really annoying now. They did a good job with it. But they were out there now. In all seriousness, they were out there in the middle of the wilderness, and yet they were complaining, not against God, but they were complaining against Moses and Aaron, as if Moses and Aaron had anything to do with it. But in verse 4 now, it says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, Behold, I am about to rain bread from heaven for you. For the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them, whether they will walk in the law or not." Now, when it says rain bread from heaven, what it actually is just indicating is that it wants to show you that the bread is actually coming from heaven, that this is a gift of God, that it's coming from nowhere else. But the bread didn't actually just fall from heaven. Like that was a misconception when I was little. I thought it was like the little kids movie, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, where like cheeseburgers were just falling down from the sky. But that's not actually what it was, because that would have been miserable, right? You just like walk outside and like, bam, I just got hit with a loaf of bread, or like the baguette is just gonna impale you on a Tuesday morning. Like that would be awful. And so it wasn't that there was actually bread just falling down from the sky, but rather it came from heaven. And that you would actually go out though, and in the morning, each morning, you could gather it off of the ground there. But notice at the end it says that this will be a test to them. This will be a test from God to them, which is so interesting because oftentimes when we think about a test from God, usually we say, man, I'm going through such a hard time right now. God is really putting me through a test right now, right? But in reality, that's not actually what is taught here. Right now, the testing was actually God's blessing over them, was God's gift over them. And that's so true for us because honestly, Christians, by and large, we usually do a lot better in our spiritual walk whenever we're walking through suffering, right? But the moment that we actually get the blessings from God, look at the church in America, right? The moment that we get material blessings, usually that's the very thing that might lead us away. And so God's saying, no, I'm about to give them a blessing. And this blessing is also going to be a test here. So in verse 5, it says, on the 6th day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather to daily. And the next point in your bulletin is this, is that complaining means that you aren't ready for God's blessing. See, because if we are complaining, it shows that we are not content, we are not happy with God and what He has done in our walk, in our life. And so whenever we have a heart that's complaining, it's usually an indication that we are not ready for anything else. Because the Apostle Paul said in the book of Philippians, I've learned to be content with a little, and I've learned to be content with a lot. And if you can't be content with the little, what do you think? Just getting more of the same stuff isn't going to make you any happier. And so if you aren't learning how to be content right now and just trusting God, even right now, you're never going to be ready for a greater blessing in the future here. And so in verse 6, it says, and so Moses and Aaron said to all the people of Israel, at evening you shall know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord. And I'll stop there. In the previous verse, it says, in the evening, you're going to know it, and in the morning, you're going to see it. And sometimes I think that's a good illustration here because sometimes we have to know that God will provide for our needs even before we see God providing for our needs. They knew it before they actually even saw it here. And so because He has heard your grumbling against you, and for what are we that you grumble against us? And so Moses and Aaron are saying, why are you complaining to us for? We're hungry too. Like we didn't leave. We've been following the Lord out here. So why are you grumbling to us? And so in verse 8 it says, and Moses said, when the Lord gives you in the evening meat to eat, and in the morning bread to the full, because the Lord has heard your grumbling, that you grumble against Him, what are we? Your grumbling is not against us, but against the Lord. And oftentimes in the Old Testament, when we look at the Old Testament and people say, well, that Old Testament God was all wrathful and vengeful. But notice this, His people are grumbling and complaining after He has brought them out of Egypt. And His response to it was, yeah, I'll give you food. I'll take care of you. That's a God of mercy right there. That's not a God of wrath towards His people, but that's a God of mercy. Because let's be honest, like if my kids are grumbling against me, I'm going to say, not like, what are you grumbling for? I'm going to say, I'm going to give you something to grumble about, right? That's our attitude. That's a parent's attitude. But yet God, who is much greater and much better, when His people, even as they were grumbling and complaining, He says, yeah, I'll give it to you, and I'm going to test you to see how well you obey me, even when you receive that blessing. And so the next point in your bulletin is this, is that complaining, a complaining heart means that you aren't content with what God has provided. Because at the very end there, He said, you aren't complaining against Moses and Aaron. You're complaining against God Himself. And ultimately, whenever we complain, whenever we grumble, it's not against anybody else. Ultimately, it's going to also be against God, primarily against God. Because you might say, my work doesn't pay me enough for this job, right? So are you saying that God hasn't provided for your needs right now? That's complaining. When you say, my spouse, they're just awful, you're saying that God hasn't provided the perfect soulmate for you to walk alongside of you? And so every time that we complain, this isn't meaning that like there aren't, serious needs and things that we need to get better at. And so for the church, there's obviously needs that we need to get better at. For this country, there's needs that you need to get better at. For every organization on this side of heaven. But here's the deal. If you're not willing to pray about it first, if you're not willing to help out about it, then you have no business complaining about it. But instead, what you ought to be doing is saying, there's something wrong here. I'm going to get on my knees and take it to the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and then I can kind of leave it alone because I know God has it at that point. And that's what the call was for them. And so in verse 9, so Moses said to Aaron, say to the whole congregation of the people of Israel, come near before the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling. Normally it'd be like, because you're about to get spanked, all right? But in verse 10 it says, and as soon as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the people of Israel, they looked towards the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. And the Lord said to Moses, I have heard the grumbling of the people of Israel. Say to them, at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God. And so the next point now, as we turn, instead of focus on what a complaining heart, to a heart of contentment. Contentment understands that God hears our concerns. They were complaining, they were grumbling, and they should have known that God could hear them, that God was walking through them, that God has seen them, and we can rest assured knowing that as well, that when we go through difficult seasons, we can rest assured and be content with where we are because we know that God sees it, and God hears it, and God understands it. So in verse 13, it says, in the evening, quail came up and covered the camp. And in the morning, dew lay around the camp. Now, that quail is actually very similar to the quail that we have here even in Florida. But back then, especially, but even today in the Sinai Peninsula, there will be large flocks, I've read, up to like 1 million birds that will just go in a pattern. And they usually go in the exact same pattern and the exact same flow. And I think God just kind of naturally orchestrated that this huge flock of birds was probably just going to keep circling around them every single night. Now, in that time, it says that they're going to eventually go around and lay around all around the camp. Now, I don't think that it was just like a scene from the Alfred Hitchcock movie, right? Where it's just like birds flying everywhere. But what it was, though, was that there was a large flock, and usually they fly pretty low to the ground, under 6 feet. And so as the flock just comes on by, you would just probably like start sticking your hand out the window and like, how many birds you want? Like, all right, 1, 2, 3, like just throw them in the tent and let's go here, because God would provide for them, which would be interesting. I'll tell you what, whenever I was in college boys like to act tough and mean and all of that. But there was one time whenever a bat got stuck in one of our dorm rooms, and college boys aren't that tough, actually, because they were now wearing, football helmets and tennis rackets, just like, screaming and running away from one little bat. So I don't know exactly how they got the quail. I'm guessing that it just naturally started to land in front of them, and they were able to grab and kill them and eat them and get that good protein every single night. But then in the morning, it says that dew lay around the camp, which also explains how they would get water. It's probably a heavy dew there. But in verse 14, it says, and when the dew had gone up, there was on the face of the wilderness a fine flake-like thing, fine as frost on the ground. And actually, if you were to read this in the Hebrew, it actually translates to Krispy Kreme donuts. Weird, right? Actually, I think it's actually Frosted Flakes, because of Frosted Flakes there as well. So this was not just, don't think of just a loaf of wheat bread or a loaf of sour bread, but rather it was a type of seed. We're going to see this even more. It was a type of seed or resin that would be on the ground, and you would actually go in and collect it, and then you could go back and actually use it as dough to make bread, okay? And so in verse 15, it says, when the people of Israel saw it, they said to another, what is it? For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, it is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat. Now, some of your translations might not say, what is it? It might actually say manna, because the word manna that we know actually means, what is it? They looked at it and they said, what's that? And so for the rest of the 40 years, every single morning, they're going to go eat whatchamacallit and thingamajigs. And that was essentially the name that they had for the food for the next 40 years, because they had not seen anything like it ever before. But when they asked Moses, so what is it? He says, it's the bread. It's the thing. You were asking for the bread. You were asking for the meat from Israel. And now God has provided for you. You should have asked for ice cream from Egypt as well. Maybe he would have provided that too. But he's saying, this is what you were asking for. And this is what God has now provided for you. And so in verse 16, it says, this is what the Lord has commanded. Gather of it, each one of you, as much as he can eat. You shall take an omer according to the number of persons that each one of you in his tent. So he says, go outside, get on the ground, and gather that up. And he says, gather up to an omer. And now I know most of you don't know what an omer is, but thankfully in the very last verse of this chapter, verse 36, he tells us, and it's very helpful. Moses says an omer is 1/10 an ephah. So now you know, all right? So it's like, thanks, Moses. That was super helpful. No, it's about a 2-liter bottle, 2-quart bottle, I should say. And so it'd probably be about a couple pounds worth of dough-type substance there. And so in verse 17, and the people of Israel did so. They gathered some more, some less, as you would expect to be. Verse 18, but when they measured it with an omer, whoever gathered much had nothing left over, and whoever gathered little had no lack. Each of them gathered as much as he could eat. And so it was always going to be exactly the amount that God was going to needed them to have. It was always, and so if you try to gather more, you weren't going to be able to gather any more to have extra. And if you gathered too little, you weren't going to have, you would always still have enough. In every single situation, for every single person, God knew exactly how much they needed. And that's the next point in your bulletin, is that contentment understands that God always provides the perfect amount. And it might feel like in our life sometimes where we say, but God, I need more. I need more. I can't do this. But God says, no, you have to trust me. And maybe the reason why you don't have more is because I still need you to trust me a little bit more first. And so contentment understands that God always provides this perfect amount. In verse 19, and Moses said to him, let no one leave any of it over till the morning. But they did not listen to Moses. Some left part of it till the morning, and it bred worms and it stank. That's how you know it really smelled. It didn't stink, it stank. And Moses was angry with them. And every mom in here says yes and amen, right? Because they should have put the dishes away last night. They should have put it back inside the fridge. Last week our car was smelling. I was like, what is going on? Second day got worse. Third day there was like flies in there. I'm like, what? And my baby was hiding fruit underneath one of the seats in the car. And I'm like, this is disgusting, right? And so I was angry, and it was biblical because I was just like Moses. Because if they left it there, it would start to breed worms. It would start to stink here because God had a better plan for them. Verse 21, morning by morning, they gathered each of them as much as they could eat. But the sun grew hot and melted. Just like that old great hymn of the faith, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. And we say, why did God care? Why did God not want them to save any? Because he wanted them to trust him that tomorrow he's still going to provide. And you don't have to gather around. You don't have to hoard all these things together and say, but no, I need to save it for a rainy day because it's all on my own. But he's saying, no, I need you to trust me right now. And if you're wondering if you would be one of these people that might try to save it up, if you're still using toilet paper that you bought in 2020, you would be one of those people, right? Verse 22, on the 6th day, they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers each. And when all the leaders of the congregation came and told Moses, he said to them, this is what the Lord has commanded. Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath. Means rest. To the Lord, bake what you will bake and boil what you will boil, and all that is left over lay aside to be kept till the morning. So for the first 6 days, they're going to just gather as much as they need, but finally, before the Sabbath rest, on the final day there, then they can go out and they can collect more than what they need. And he says, bake it in advance, boil it in advance, because on the Sabbath, you're just going to be able to rest. So in verse 24, so they laid it aside to the morning as Moses commanded, and it did not stink, and there were no worms in it. And we say, but that's impossible every other day. Yes, because God was in control over all of it. And he's like, do you trust me? I know it doesn't make sense that it would have stink and had worms in it every single day, but except for on the Sabbath, but I'm trying to teach that you can trust me even now. When it comes to that day and you say, I don't have enough food for the next day, God says, just trust me. Just trust me. And in verse 25, it says, and Moses said, eat it today, for today is the Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field. So 6 days you shall gather it, but on the 7th day, which is the Sabbath, there will be none. This is the first Chick-fil-A, I think. We actually we play a cruel trick on our guest. We give them a little card, and we actually, inside the card, we have a little Chick-fil-A gift card inside of it. Some of you are like, I don't need to fill out a guest card. Because we eat Christian chicken around here. None of that pagan Popeye stuff. But we leave it, and then I always laugh because it's like, we're going to make them want Chick-fil-A, and then they're going to be mad at us because they can't have Chick-fil-A today anyway. But God is saying here that you need to learn how to trust me, even when it doesn't make sense. For them, in the history of the world, no culture had ever had a day off before right now. No culture ever gave anyone a day off. Everybody works 7 days a week. But God is saying in this moment now, he is instituting something brand new and says, you're going to learn how to trust me. Even when you can't go out and even when you can't provide for yourself, I'm still going to provide it for you. Will you trust me in this? And so the next point in your bulletin is this, is that contentment understands that to receive God's provision, we must obey. To receive God's provision, we must obey. See, we want to do it ourselves, don't we? We want to feel like, no, I'm in control over this. I can work hard. I can pull in all the money I need. I can pull up my bootstraps. I can do it. I can fix my family. I can do everything myself. But God is saying, no, you can't do it. That's the whole point. I didn't make you to be able to do it on yourself. I made you to need to trust me. And are you going to trust him today, even now? The last few verses. On the seventh day, some of the people went out together, but they found none. And the Lord said to Moses, how long will you refuse to keep the commandments and my laws? See, the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore, on the sixth day, he gives you the bread for 2 days. Remain each of you in his place. Let no one go out of his place on the seventh day. So the people rested on the seventh day. And we're going to discuss this idea of Sabbath much more in detail here in the next few weeks. But God is saying, listen, I need you to trust me. This one day, will you trust God in this way? In verse 31, so the house of Israel called its name Manna. It was like coriander seed. White taste, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. That sounds pretty good, right? In fact, actually, the book of Psalms, Psalm 78, I believe, says that this food was actually the food of angels. This was what the angels eat, according to the psalmist, right? This was the first angel food cake, if you will. This was going to be something that was delicious. It was going to be wafers with honey. It's like way better than our wafers, it sounds like. And yet they were going to have this. Now, if you know the rest of the story, though, even then, by the book of Numbers, it says that eventually Israel got sick of this. Israel actually started complaining. The food of the angels wasn't even good for them. And in some sense, I get it, right? Because they were going to eat this every single day for the next 40 years. Like, I love pizza, but I don't know if I'd eat pizza that much. Even, I'd do weird things. I'd put pineapple and weird things on it. But, I wouldn't want it every single day. So they eventually get sick, but then you have to say, well, God didn't intend for them to have it every day for 40 years, did he? He intended it just for a short time, but because they didn't obey, then God says, listen, I'm still going to provide for you even in the midst of your disobedience, but it's not going to be as pleasant. It's not going to be what I designed for you. It's not going to be as fulfilling as what it should have been. And so in verse 32 here, it says, Moses said, this is what the Lord has commanded. Let an omer of it be kept throughout your generations, so that they may see the bread with which I fed you in the wilderness, when I brought you out of the land of Egypt. And Moses said to Aaron, take a jar and put an omer of manna in it, and place it before the Lord to be kept throughout all the generations. As the Lord commanded Moses, so Aaron placed it before the testimony and be kept. Let's finish it up here. Verse 35. The people of Israel ate the manna for 40 years till they came to the habitable land. And they ate manna till they came to the border of the land of Canaan. And omer is a 10th part of the ephah. Thank you, Moses. And in that last little bit here we saw, did you notice? One of the commands was, the last command here was, Moses and Aaron are now to take a jar of manna and actually keep it for generations upon generations to come. And we have to ask ourselves, but why? Why did that matter? And in fact, actually, if you go all the way to the New Testament in Hebrews chapter 9, verse 4, it starts talking about the Ark of the Covenant. Now, if you don't know what the Ark of the Covenant is, we're going to look a lot more in detail whenever we get a little bit farther in the book of Exodus here. But in the Ark of the Covenant was a gold box for which God commanded to be made. And inside of that gold box here, there's going to be a few things that were kept. Number one, the first thing was the Ten Commandments. And that makes sense, right? That's a big story in the Bible. That makes sense why we want to keep it. And ultimately, the Ten Commandments shows just how sinful we are because nobody is going to be able to keep that. And it means that we are now relying on God to be our holiness. And then the second thing that's actually going to be kept inside the Ark of the Covenant was Aaron's staff. Aaron, who was the Levite that we were talking about, he was a priest. And throughout the whole entire Old Testament, you could not get to God outside of the priestly line. They were the ones that to take your sin into the Holy of Holies and find forgiveness. You needed the priest. And so they actually put Aaron's staff inside of there as well. But there's a third thing. Guess what that third thing was? This jar of manna. And we say, why was it that important? Why was it that important that it got put in the Holy of Holies, that it got put in the Ark of the Covenant? Because if you don't know, that Ark of the Covenant eventually went in the most holy place of all of Israel. And on top of that box, there's going to be cherubim angels that stretch out. And then right in the middle of it, it says the Spirit of God dwelt on that thing. And whenever God would speak to Moses, it said that the voice came from right there on the Ark of the Covenant, right there. And we say, but why was manna so important? Because I don't think it's even about the manna. And we don't find that out until we get to John chapter 6 in the New Testament. In John chapter 6, I'll read it. We won't have it on the screen, but I'll read in just a moment here. Let me set it up. In John chapter 6 here, Jesus actually goes out and there's a large crowd following him, just like Moses a long time ago. And in that large crowd here, they come up to him and they say, we're hungry. And in that moment here, Jesus says, okay, you're hungry, you're complaining, I'll feed you. Just like God did, because I'm God too. And he starts to feed 5,000 people. And then they come up to him. And John chapter 6, they come up to him and they ask him. They come to him. And they start to ask him here, but can't you give us a sign that shows us that you are also from God here? And he starts to give them a sign in John chapter 6. Let me pull it up. Verse 29, Jesus said, this is the work that you believe in him, whom he has sent. So they said to him, then what sign do you do that we may see and believe you? What work do you perform? Our fathers ate the manna in the wilderness. As it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. Jesus said to him, truly, truly, I say to you, it was not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. They said to him, sir, give us this bread. And Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall never hunger. Whoever believes in me shall never thirst. And if you did not catch what I just did there, I was trying to show you that the manna was Jesus. That Jesus is what we need. When we go to God and we say, God, I'm hungry. God, I have needs. God, I can't fulfill this all myself. We're not saying that we need more material possession. What's really happening is we're saying, God, I need more of you. And if I have more of you, I don't need anything else in this world. And this was the message that God was teaching them. Not that they could be full. God could have filled them in any way. He's saying, I want you to trust me. And the last point in your bulletin is this, is that contentment understands that God is always faithful. Contentment understands that God is always faithful. I'll finish off with one last story and then we're done. A few years ago, I was flying from Tulsa to Dallas. It's a 45-minute, real short, easy flight. I was by myself that day, and I came up to my seat. It was an aisle seat, and there's a woman right in the middle here, and I could tell immediately that there's something wrong. She was just stressed. She was worried, and so I wasn't really in the mood for talking either, so I just kind of sat down and I was doing my thing, and I could just tell that she was just stressed and worried, and so the plane started to taxi, and I could see her just kind of like wringing her hands out and just, start to breathe heavy, almost like she's having a baby, like she's like what is going on here? And we finally get down through the taxi, and we start to take off, and the plane kind of pushes you back a little bit, and she just pushed her head back all the way, and then she just grabbed my hand, and I was like, oh, okay, we're doing this, all right? And so she's now grabbing my hand, and I think the guy on the other side, and she's just holding on with her eyes closed, and it finally gets up off the ground. It starts to level off and feel a little bit more normal, and she lets go, and she's like, I'm sorry, I don't like flying. I was like, oh, really? Didn't notice. And it starts to be smooth. Eventually, the airline pilot clicked the seatbelt light off there so you didn't have to wear it anymore. but then it gave a little shake, right? Because airplanes do that. There's always a little bit of turbulence, and it shook, and every time it shook, she'd grab hold of things. I was keeping my arms over here now, but she was grabbing hold of things and just holding on for dear life. And eventually then the pilot actually put the seatbelt light back on there. And so everybody's putting the seatbelt on. I could just see she was stressed. She was worried. And I started to ask her, actually, try to take her mind off. I was like, so what do you do for a living? She's like, I work for American Airlines. I was like, ooh, maybe I should be scared too. She's like, I don't work up here. I don't work in the planes. I was like, it's okay. And it started to shake even more. And the turbulence started to get a little bit worse. Not bad, but a little bit worse. And I could just see her getting worried. And finally, she looks at me. She's like, is this normal? I was like, yeah, it's normal. It's fine. The pilots have it. This is just happens in every flight. It's okay. And then she's like, okay. And she's shaking here. And then the plane starts to shake even more. And she finally turns to me. She's like, we got to do something. And I was like, what are we going to do? I don't think we can do too much, you and me. So I said, I think we should just really hope the pilot knows what he's doing. And I'm sure he does. And in the same way, in our life, just like her and I were in the same plane, we were either going to get to the destination or we were going to crash, but there was nothing that we could have done there. But you could either choose to trust in the pilot, choose to trust in the one that's in charge, or you could say, what am I going to do? I'm going to hold on tight, and I'm going to stress this out until we finally hit the ground one way or the other, and I'm not going to trust that they know what they're doing. In the same way in our life, we sit here and we say, am I going to trust God is in control? Where I can just sit back and relax and I can take a nap, honestly, because I just have so much faith that God is in control, that he is going to get me to the place that he wants me to be, and I can rest assured in him and nothing else? Or am I going to be stressing out here and saying, no, this isn't right, this isn't good? So that's the call for you and I, to say, listen, I'm going to trust in God because I have a heart that's content that whether it's good or tomorrow is bad, God is in control, and that's enough. That's enough for me. And when I get to tomorrow, I'll trust him then too. So with every head bowed and every eye closed, let's pray together. Father, Lord, I pray that we learn how to trust you better. It's so easy to see the hypocrisy of the Israelites, Lord, but I pray that mirror gets turned back on us and that we find, each and every one of us finds a place that we are not trusting in you. Lord, for some of us, it might be that we have not even put our faith and trust in you. I pray that if anyone's in here today, that they would do that here. But then even for us that have been walking with you for a long time, I pray that we would also keep putting our trust in you. Not for salvation, we know that we're kept in you, but Lord, that we can be obedient and follow you every step of the way. I thank you that you're a God that cares for us. I thank you that you're a God that hasn't ever left us, even when we're grumbling and complaining to you. You still are good. We thank you, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Please stand and sing with us one more song.